I collapsed at the Legion Hall on a Saturday morning in late October, right in the middle of helping set up for the Remembrance Day breakfast committee. One moment I was unfolding a metal chair, and the next I was on the floor, my cheek against the cold concrete, watching the fluorescent lights above me blur into something soft and very far away. The paramedics reached me within 6 minutes. They told me later that I had gone into cardiac arrest. A massive heart attack, the kind that doesn't knock politely before it comes through the door. They worked on me right there between the folding tables and the paper poppy centerpieces, while my friend Rhonda stood in the doorway, with both hands pressed over her mouth, watching. The hospital called my daughter 63 times over the next 4 days. She did not answer once. When I finally opened my eyes, I was in the cardiac care unit at Hamilton General. The ceiling tiles were white. The machines beside me beeped with a steady patience that felt almost kind. And sitting in the vinyl chair to my left, still wearing her coat, was Rhonda. The woman I had worked all alongside in hospital administration for 22 years. She had a paper cup of Tim Hortons coffee balanced on her knee and a crease on her cheek from sleeping against her own shoulder. She was not my daughter. She was not family, not by blood anyway. She was a 64-year-old woman who had driven herself to the hospital the night of my collapse and simply refused to leave. Before I go any further, I want to be clear about something. This is not a story about hating my daughter. It is a story about what I finally understood after 4 days unconscious in a cardiac unit, and what I chose to do about it. If you have ever made excuses for someone who should have shown up and didn't, I think you will understand exactly what I mean. The nurses told me what had happened in stages gently, the way you chip ice off a windshield rather than pouring hot water over it all at once. Cardiac arrest at the Legion Hall. Defibrillator used twice. Emergency surgery. A stent placed in my left anterior descending artery. 4 days in and out of sedation. Rhonda had listed herself as my emergency contact because she was the first person on scene, and she simply said the words before anyone thought to question them. They tried my daughter's number continuously. 63 times, according to the call log the charge nurse eventually showed me. I remember staring at that number. 63. I kept thinking about the drive from Hamilton to where my daughter lives in Oakville. 40 minutes on a clear day, maybe 50 with traffic on the QEW. 63 calls across 4 Ds, and she hadn't found 40 minutes. I asked Rhonda if she knew where my daughter was. Rhonda handed me her phone without a word. I am not a woman who spends much time on social media. My late husband used to tease me about it. He said I was the only person in Ontario who still preferred a telephone call to a text message. But I know how to scroll through an Instagram page when someone holds the screen close enough. My daughter's account was public. The first post had gone up the evening before my collapse. She and my son-in-law standing at a cruise terminal somewhere, their luggage behind them, boarding passes in hand. The caption read, "Finally, 7 days with no obligations, no emails, no noise. Just us and the ocean. Turning our phones off." The next post was from 2 days into my hospital stay. A wide blue horizon, a cruise ship railing, my son-in-law's parents sitting in deck chairs, raising glasses of something sparkling, all of them laughing. The caption, "No signal, no schedule, no stress. This is exactly what we needed." I looked at that caption for a long time. No signal, but she had signal enough to post. She had signal enough to add a location tag, Inside Passage, BC. She had signal enough to respond to 14 comments below the photo, including one from a coworker that said, "You deserve this break. You've been so run down lately," to which my daughter replied with a heart emoji and the words, "You have no idea." No signal. The third post was from the day I had woken up. It showed my 8-year-old grandson building something out of driftwood on a beach, his rubber boots caked in wet sand, his face turned up toward the camera with a gap-toothed grin that looked exactly like his grandfather at that age. The caption said, "My whole heart. My whole heart." I handed the phone back to Rhonda. She didn't say anything. She set it face down on the armrest and reached over to hold my hand. Here is the thing about moments of clarity. They don't always arrive with drama. Sometimes they arrive quietly, the way the sun comes through the blinds on a winter morning. Not sudden, just steadily until the room is full of light and you can't pretend anymore that it's dark. Lying in that hospital bed, I stopped pretending. I thought about my husband's funeral 3 years ago. I had called my daughter from the palliative care unit at 3 in the morning to tell her that her father was fading. She had arrived 5 hours after he passed, still carrying her laptop bag, still dressed from work. She had hugged me, made 2 phone calls in the hallway, and left after one night. I told myself she grieved differently. I told myself the drive was far. I told myself a lot of things. I thought about my grandson's 5th birthday party, to which I had not been invited because, as my daughter explained, they were keeping it really small that year. Just close family and a few of his school friends. I was his grandmother. I was the only grandparent left alive on her side of the family. But I was not close family. I thought about last Christmas, when I had driven to Oakville with a car full of gifts and a roast chicken from the market, and my daughter had come to the door to tell me, apologetically, that they had already made plans with my son-in-law's parents, and it had slipped her mind to mention it. I had driven home alone on the 403 in the dark, with the roast chicken still warm on the passenger seat. I had told myself it was an oversight. People get busy. She had a lot on her plate. Lying there in that cardiac unit with 63 unanswered calls sitting between us, I finally allowed myself to say what I had been refusing to say for 3 years. She wasn't too busy. She had simply moved me to the back of her life, one small step at a time, until I was barely visible, and I had let her. On the 4th day, Rhonda brought me something she had found while collecting my mail. She had gone to the house to water my plants, the way she had been doing every other day since my collapse. When she came back to the hospital that afternoon, her face was arranged in a way I recognized from 22 years of working alongside her. Careful, composed, not wanting to show what was underneath. She handed me a large envelope. The return address was a real estate brokerage, Caldwell and Partners Property Group, Burlington, Ontario. Inside was a cover letter addressed to me, dated 2 weeks before my collapse. It confirmed a listing preparation meeting scheduled for the following month. It referred to my daughter by name as the authorized representative of the homeowner. It included a pre-signed listing agreement with a blank for my signature and a market assessment that valued my home at $740,000. 2 weeks before I collapsed. I sat with that envelope in my lap for a very long time. 3 years earlier, after my husband died, my daughter had suggested I sign a general power of attorney, just as a precaution, she had said, in case something ever happened to me and someone needed to manage things. I had trusted her. I had signed the document at her kitchen table, over a cup of tea, while my grandson watched cartoons in the next room. It had seemed like the responsible, loving thing to do. Now I understood what that document had been for. She had been calling people before my collapse. Rhonda told me that my neighbor Phyllis had mentioned receiving a call from my daughter about 3 weeks prior. Very friendly, Phyllis said. Just checking in. But then the questions had turned strange. Had Phyllis noticed me seeming confused lately? Any trouble with dates, forgetting appointments, any falls, any signs I wasn't managing on my own? Phyllis had said no, of course not. I had helped her carry her groceries in from the car the week before. I had reminded her about the storm drain that needed clearing before the freeze. My daughter had thanked her and said she was just being cautious. At Mom's age, you never know. I was 67 years old. I had worked in hospital administration for 30 years. I managed my own finances, drove my own car, and had not once confused a date or forgotten an appointment in my life. At Mom's age, you never know. She had been building a case, the way you lay a foundation before you raise a wall, quietly, piece by piece, so that by the time anyone looks, the structure is already there. A neighbor's testimony about my supposed decline, a power of attorney she already held, a listing agreement waiting for my signature, or perhaps not waiting for it at all. A retirement residence somewhere in Burlington, I imagined, with my name on a wait list. I had nearly died alone in a Legion Hall while my daughter was posting cruise ship sunsets to Instagram, and what she was planning to do when she came home was put me in a care facility and sell the house my husband and I had lived in for 34 years. When people ask me what the heart attack felt like, I tell them the physical pain was nothing compared to what I felt reading that listing agreement. I waited until I was home before I called my solicitor. Her name is Mrs. Tanaka, and she has handled my family's legal affairs for 15 years. She is a small, precise woman who speaks quietly and means every word. When I explained what had happened, the 63 calls, the cruise, the listing agreement, the power of attorney, she was silent for a moment. Then she said, "This is not the first time I have seen this. What would you like to do?" I told her exactly what I wanted to do. Before I tell you what happened in Mrs. Tanaka's office, I want to ask you something. If you have ever kept making excuses for someone who stopped showing up for you, type 1 in the comments. If you have ever been the person sitting in the chair beside the hospital bed, the one who stayed without being asked, type 2. And if you believe it is never too late to decide that your own life belongs to you, type 3. Your comment matters more than you know. I should also mention that some details in this story have been adjusted for privacy. The emotional truth, though, every bit of that is real. We met twice the following week. Mrs. Tanaka drafted a new will, revoked the general power of attorney, and replaced it with a new document naming Rhonda as my sole attorney for both property and personal care. A woman who had sat beside my hospital bed for 4 days without being asked and without complaint. The new will was straightforward. To my grandson, a contribution of $40,000 into a registered education savings plan locked in trust with Mrs. Tanaka as administrator until he turned 18. His parents would have no access to it. Not a dollar, not an inquiry, not a signature. To the Hamilton Health Sciences Foundation, $15,000, designated for the cardiac care unit where the nurses had been so kind to me. To the Royal Canadian Legion Branch 163, where I had volunteered every other Saturday for 11 years, $10,000. To my church's food bank, $5,000. To Rhonda, $20,000. Because some debts cannot be repaid, but they can be acknowledged. And to my daughter, $1. Not nothing, $1, because I wanted her to know I had thought about it carefully and made a choice. Mrs. Tanaka asked me again whether I was certain. I told her I hadn't been this certain of anything since I said yes at the altar 38 years ago. My daughter came back from her cruise on a Tuesday. She called me Wednesday evening, her voice in a rush of alarm that would have been convincing if I hadn't already read the listing agreement. "Oh my God, Mom, I just saw all these messages. What happened? Are you okay?" I told her I had had a heart attack, that I had been in hospital for 4 days, that the cardiac unit had tried to reach her 63 times. There was a pause, then our phones barely worked out there. The ship's connection was so unreliable. I had no idea it was serious. I thought about the Instagram post, no signal, no schedule, no stress, posted from the inside passage with 14 comment replies and a location tag. I said, "I know." She came to see me that Friday. My son-in-law drove. They arrived at 11 in the morning and stayed until just past noon. My son-in-law admired the kitchen renovations, which had been done 2 years prior. My daughter talked about the cruise for most of the visit, the food, the excursions, the cabin upgrade they had managed to secure at the last minute. She asked how I was feeling once. She did not ask about the surgery. She did not ask about the recovery plan, my medications, or whether I needed help around the house. She did not ask who had stayed with me. What she did ask, just before they left, as she was pulling on her jacket in the front hall, was whether I had thought any more about getting my affairs in order after a scare like this. I told her I had. I told her I had already been to see Mrs. Tanaka. Something shifted in her face, just a flicker, gone quickly. "Oh, that's really smart, Mom. Really responsible." I said, "I thought so too." She kissed my cheek at the door and said they'd be back soon to check on me. My son-in-law shook my hand. They drove away. The meeting at Mrs. Tanaka's office was the following Thursday afternoon. I wore the blue dress my husband had bought me for our anniversary 4 years ago. Rhonda drove. My daughter and my son-in-law arrived at 2 o'clock exactly. Both dressed for a business meeting, he in a gray suit, she in a black blazer and heels. The kind of clothes you wear when you want to be taken seriously. They stopped when they saw Rhonda sitting beside me. My daughter said, "Why is she here?" I said, "Because I asked her to be." My son-in-law looked at Mrs. Tanaka. "This is a family matter." Mrs. Tanaka said pleasantly, "Ms. Rhonda is here at Joan's request. Please sit down." They sat. The silence in the room was the kind you could feel. Mrs. Tanaka began with the power of attorney. She placed a copy of the revocation on the table and explained clearly, and without inflection, that the general power of attorney signed 3 years prior had been revoked and replaced. My daughter's name was no longer on it. My daughter looked at the document, then at me. "Mom, I don't understand." I slid the real estate listing agreement across the table. My son-in-law reached for it first. His jaw tightened as he read. My daughter's eyes moved from the document to my face and back. "That was just exploratory," she said finally. "We were worried about you managing the house alone. It's a lot of property for one person." I said, "You were worried enough to contact a brokerage, have me listed as the homeowner's authorized representative, and schedules a listing preparation meeting. Before I had a heart attack, before anything had happened." It wasn't like that. I said, "I know what it was like. I also know you called Phyllis, and I imagine you called others I haven't heard from yet." My son-in-law put on his professional voice. "Joan, we were acting out of concern. These are difficult conversations that families have." I held up my hand. I said, "The hospital called my daughter 63 times in 4 days. I was having emergency cardiac surgery. She was posting photographs to Instagram with the caption, 'No stress, no obligations.' I woke up from a 4-day sedation, and the person sitting beside my bed was Rhonda, not my daughter, not family. Rhonda." My daughter was crying now. The tears were real, I think. Sometimes the most painful thing about people is that their feelings are genuine even when their choices are not. She said, "I made a mistake, I know that, but you can't take everything away because of one mistake." I said it wasn't one mistake. I told her about her father's funeral. I told her about my grandson's 5th birthday. About Christmas on the 403 with a cooling roast chicken on the passenger seat. About every Sunday phone call that had gone to voicemail. Every school event I had heard about secondhand, through Phyllis, who had heard it from the woman across the street. I said, "You didn't make one mistake. You made a long series of choices. And so did I. I chose to excuse them. I am done making that choice." Mrs. Tanaka read the new will. My son-in-law interrupted twice. My daughter stopped crying and started negotiating. "Think about your grandson. You're punishing him." I told her, my grandson's education fund was $40,000, and neither of them could touch a cent of it until he was 18, which I thought was a fine start. My son-in-law mentioned contesting the will. Mrs. Tanaka mentioned that my capacity had been assessed in writing by my cardiologist and my GP, both of whom had signed letters dated the week prior. They left before the meeting concluded. My daughter stood at the door and said, "You'll regret this when you're old." and you need us." I said, "I needed you 63 times. You didn't pick up." The door closed. Rhonda and I sat in Mrs. Tanaka's office for a few minutes after they were gone, neither of us saying much. Mrs. Tanaka made tea. Outside the window, Hamilton in November, gray sky, bare maples, the first suggestion of snow drifting down toward the escarpment. Rhonda said, "How do you feel?" I thought about it honestly. I said, like myself, for the first time in a long time. I sold the house in the spring, not because I had to, because I chose to. It was beautiful, full of 34 years of a life I had loved, and it was also too large and too quiet, and full of rooms I had been keeping clean for visitors who never came. I found a 2-bedroom condo near the escarpment, bright and manageable, with a balcony where I could see the lake on a clear day. Moving day was a Saturday in April. Rhonda organized it. 6 people from the Legion showed up with trucks. The woman from my pew at church brought a casserole. Phyllis came and cried, a little over the kitchen tiles she had always admired. By evening, the boxes were mostly in, and Rhonda was standing in my new kitchen putting dishes away while I sat at the island with a cup of tea and watched her. I said, "I don't know how I got so lucky in the friends department." She said, "You were a good friend first. That's usually how it works." My grandson called me 3 weeks after the meeting at Mrs. Tanaka's office. He had found my number on an old birthday card, he said. He was 8 years old and he called from his mother's old phone, which she had passed along to him for games. And he called on a Tuesday evening at 7:45 and said, "Grandma? It's me. I heard you were sick. Are you okay?" I had to put my hand over my mouth for a moment. I said, "I'm okay, sweetheart. I'm really okay." He said, "Can I come see your new place sometime?" I said, "Anytime you want. I'll make butter tarts." He said, "The ones with the raisins?" I said, "Whatever kind you like." He came on a Saturday in May, dropped off at the curb by my son-in-law, who did not come to the door. My grandson stood on my doorstep with his backpack and his rubber boots and a drawing he had made. "For Grandma. Get better. 1 tea." I put it on my refrigerator immediately. We spent the afternoon making butter tarts and walking along the escarpment and talking about his class and his best friend, whose name he could not stop saying. He wanted to know everything about the hospital. He wanted to know if the machines really beeped. He said he thought he might want to be a doctor when he grew up. I told him he would be a wonderful doctor. When Rhonda came by to drive him home, he hugged her too, without being asked, because children are often better at recognizing goodness than the rest of us are. It is summer now, 8 months since I collapsed at the Legion Hall. My cardiologist says my recovery is, in his word, excellent, which he said with a kind of professional surprise I found very satisfying. I volunteer at the Legion on Saturdays again. I serve coffee and set up the chairs, and do not dwell on the fact that those are the last chairs I folded before my heart stopped. Rhonda and I have dinner most Thursdays. We have started a morning fitness class at the community center, the same one I used to go to alone, which I now go to with someone beside me. I have booked a trip. Prince Edward Island in August, 10 days. I have never been. My husband always wanted to go, and we always said next year, and then next year became 38 years, and then he was gone. I am going for both of us. My grandson calls every other Sunday now, unprompted. I am not sure whether his mother knows. I have not asked. I do not know what will happen with my daughter. I have stopped trying to answer that question. There are things you carry for a long time, and then you set down. Not because they are resolved, but because you finally understand they were never entirely yours to carry alone. What I know is this. I am 67 years old. I had a heart attack in a Legion Hall in Hamilton, Ontario, and the person who stayed beside me for 4 days was a woman who owed me nothing except 22 years of good friendship. I woke up and I finally saw clearly what had been true for a very long time. The 63 calls my daughter never answered are on a hospital log somewhere. I do not Not need to look at them anymore. I know what they say. I have a condo with a balcony where I can see the lake. I have a grandson who calls on Sundays and spells better with one T. I have a friend who brings coffee and stays until the work is done. I have a plane ticket to Prince Edward Island and a drawing on my refrigerator and a life that belongs to me again, completely. If you have been making yourself smaller, hoping that if you are quiet enough, convenient enough, easy enough to overlook, someone will finally decide you were worth the drive. Please hear me when I say this. You do not have to wait to be worth it. You already are. Choose the people who chose you. Everything else is just paperwork.